Okay, welcome everyone. Super excited that you're joining us for this new webinar, which is called How to Prepare Your Business for the Future of AI. And as you can see, we're using a little bit of AI over here already in this webinar with the cam we're using. And with AI being everywhere, I think this is a perfect time to really discuss how can we prepare for this new future, for the new developments we're seeing nowadays. And I'm today hosting this webinar and hoping to share some new insights. Now, you might be wondering, why is a head of learning studios actually talking about AI? So a little bit about me. So I'm the head of learning studios at Growth Tribe, and we've been training companies for the past 6 years on digital transformation with growth, marketing, data, and innovation in mind. But personally, as a UX designer, educator, and a manager, I'm really obsessed with the adoption and usefulness of technology. So with the latest developments, I think there's a lot of potential, but also a lot to gain on the adoption side. With the latest development, there's a clear shift in how we implement AI from trying to create our own use cases to actually having every employee in your company probably encountering AI or using it on an individual basis as well. We're hoping to give some insights into how to control for that or how to scale that properly. And then I think a lot of the AI transformation playbooks are not actually reflecting those changes in perspective that we are talking about nowadays. So you're going to be bombarded with a lot of different tools and tips to get you on your way. It will create a little bit more chaos before we actually provide structure in that chaos. And I really advise you to take a lot of screenshots, maybe drop some questions in the Q&A tab or in the chat that we can pick up at the end. And then keep in mind that there's also some resources shared at the end. So stick with me, and hopefully you get some really useful insights that you can start applying today. Looking forward, so a little recap of what Growth Tribe does. So we've been training companies and individuals in some of these digital skills, and we're also partnering up with some of the bigger companies in the Netherlands and in Europe to really drive this digital transformation forward. And we're trying to look at the potential technology has and try to make people feel comfortable implementing it in their business, whether you're an individual or an actual business leader. So when it comes to these skills, in some of these companies, we've trained a lot of different people on using data analytics, visualization, or even general data literacy to really foster the true potential of AI. And that's what we hope to achieve today as well, a little bit of empowerment. So what we'll be covering is creating a little bit of clarity in the midst of chaos and hype, I would say. Common pitfalls and blockers, we're going to cover those as well. Strategies and tactics. And then lastly, we'll do a little Q&A. Quick check. Nice. So going into topic number one, creating clarity in the midst of chaos. So why do you care about this? Probably you have this sense of fear of missing out. Other competitors are using this technology. Maybe you lack a bit of understanding, cannot follow along in conversations. You are forced to do more with less, and you think AI actually has potential. And then there's also this fight for talent. So people want to be at the forefront of technology. So how do you foster all of these things into one? You're just in time because robots haven't taken over yet. So we still have time to get ahead of this and put on some pink glasses to see the positive side of things. So let's see. AI is more popular than ever before. Just wanted to see if you can guess what actually happened over here in 2012. So we had already a peak in AI popularity about 10 years ago, a little bit over 10 years ago. And yeah, it's really telling for how AI is being hyped up right now. So take a little moment. Do you think you know what happened there? Was it perhaps IBM Watson winning Jeopardy? Not really. That was 1 year before this spike. It was actually the moment when Apple released Siri. So that's when AI, more or less, the way people see it, invaded our lives. It reached the end user, the everyday person, and was something that people start using or started being afraid of. And then later it was also popularized through culture. So it became a topic and then also kept that popularity up for a bit. But then it kind of faded away for a bit until today, where popularity is back. And that's mainly because of something, yeah, we're all using today or yesterday already, which is chatgpt. It was released to the public and was openly available. Although this technology has already been in development since 2018, this was the moment it became accessible and people started seeing the value for their personal lives as well. So we're again at this pivotal moment where we say, is it going to be a hype or is it going to be useful for us on a daily basis? And what I think we can already say is that indeed it is overhyped. So if you feel like there's a lot of chaos and a lot of hype, that is true, but there is some sense of truth to the potential that this technology has. So we're trying to look beyond the hype and we're looking into the potential it has, but maybe also the pitfalls. And we're trying to give you those, those mental frameworks to start assessing different decisions you need to make. So going beyond the hype, I think it's important to know that a lot of organizations currently believe that AI will give them a competitive edge, whether that's using something like ChatGPT or building your own AI solutions. And I think this is something that will just keep increasing over the years. So hype or not, organizations already believe it's going to be important. And the way we tackle this is going to change as well. And it's good to note that the biggest companies out there keep investing more and more in AI. So the consumer technologies and other technology companies are investing more in integrating AI and acquiring AI companies across the board. So that will continue, but I think one of the key changes that we'll see is that users and employees will soon, drop the word AI from the tools they use. So the same way we saw Siri or assistants coming into our lives and then being scary and later just becoming second nature, I think for these generative AI tools, we will see the same thing, where soon it will just be a side-by-side way of working with this technology, and it will spread pretty quickly. Now, it's good to know that this wasn't necessarily the case for trend watchers. They didn't really expect this to explode on such short notice. As you can see here from the impact radar shared by Gartner, end of last year, the generative AI technology is out here on the outer rim, which is actually a technology that's expected to create impact in the upcoming 6 to 8 years. And I think Reid Hoffman says it really well here. The future is always sooner and stranger than you think. So while it's difficult to predict exactly where AI will take us, it's important to focus some of our best minds on the implications of living or working with this technology. Talking about our best minds, I think it's everyone here in this webinar. So we need to get you in the right place to start leading this revolution. And I think it's good to know that this is not necessarily something new. We also saw this within coding. So we went from custom code to low code tools where you can drag and drop things, to no code where you can actually build whole applications without code. And now actually seeing that we have text to code where you can create, let's say, a whole interface or an application by prompting it together. So this is an example of Galileo.ai, which allows you to generate these prototypes and just set up a Figma or a coded prototype in no time, basically. So how is this going to change our way of working? That's the question. I think it's also good to know that when we see these Copilot or AI tools arise, they are now accessible to individuals, but we already see that they are becoming accessible and also manageable on an enterprise or company level. So this allows you to maybe set up more governance, maybe set up certain rules that can be followed at scale. And I think GitHub Copilot is an example where they've already seen a lot of positive impact with about 55% faster coding. So it auto-completes certain types of code. It also helps you fix bugs faster. And on top of that, we see that the humans or the workers that actually use this technology, they feel a lot more fulfilled. So they can focus on more creative tasks and they can focus on more meaningful tasks. And I think that's the core of the potential that this technology has when done correctly. Now, there are, of course, pitfalls and blockers. So while everything sounds very, very sexy, very fun, even with GitHub Copilot, we see some things going wrong. So very important to know what the pitfalls are. But before we dive in, I wanted to do a little poll to see in what way or in what measure you actually implement AI in your business nowadays, just to get a sense of who's in the room and yeah, what level of maturity you might be at. So full transparency, this is not to assess you. This is anonymous, and this is meant to meant to get an idea of where everybody's at. So coming up, let's see, there's a poll. Yeah, so the question is, how are you currently implementing AI? You either don't use it, but looking into it, you've tested some proof of concepts. Let's see, I cannot read it because, we have a few promising proof of concepts looking to scale. We have processes that fully enable AI, or we have started implementing with limited AI use cases. So actually going for like a smaller set of use cases to implement. So let's have a look. I'm going to leave it on for a second. Nice. There's already some examples of how people use it. Only chatgpt. So I think that's a good example of how it's being used by individuals. And now we're also talking about company level. So let's have a look. Most people are in the phase of looking into it or having tested a few concepts with limited success, which is not weird. This is actually the biggest group also in terms of industry standards. So in this survey by Forbes, we see that most companies are in the proof of concept phase, but there are already companies that are adopting AI at a bigger scale. So quick question here from Luke. Yeah, there will be resources shared after the session as well. But if you want to get all the nifty little details, then definitely suggest sticking around. So where are you currently and what can you do to move up this maturity framework? It's good to know that wherever you are in this framework, probably companies or you realize that it's a top priority for your business strategy. So what do we know about making decisions when we're in the midst of overload? Doesn't really help us. So whether it's this fear of missing out of jumping into crypto or another new technology, there's a lot of risk in taking the wrong decision or just doing it quickly and making mistakes. So here are a few things you want to definitely avoid when diving in. As we know, the number of AI projects deployed is increasing, but we see 85% of them failing due to unclear objectives and obscure R&D project management processes. This means there's a lack of strategy, there's a lack of vision, and AI is not being used for what it's best capable of. So I think this is one of the most important things that goes wrong in most cases. Secondly, there's actually a risk of implementing AI without a clear strategy when it comes to ethics and governance as well. So we know the example from GitHub Copilot. GitHub Copilot from Microsoft is actually being sued at the moment because they are tapping into code written by an open source community and then using that for a paid service. And I think there's more and more of these questions and lawsuits popping up where you have to ask yourself, what is the right thing to do? And how does this align with legal frameworks out there, even if they don't exist yet? Some of this legal advice is not there yet, is being developed in the moment. Then we have outsourcing as a result of automation, which in the past, when we had this boom of outsourcing in 2013, when Amazon Mechanical Turk became available, when you could outsource work to other countries, we saw that this was actually used by some of the best employees in the company because they knew there were other things to do in life that they thought was important, such as checking cat videos on Facebook. In this case, Bob, who was actually outsourcing his work as a programmer to someone in China or another country. In this case, it was China. He got laid off because the company didn't really respect this kind of attitude. I think that's something we have to be careful about now, as we're seeing more and more individuals use this technology. There's a lot of bias, and there's also a lot of mental considerations taken to mind. And this is also where psychological safety comes in. So it has to be okay to use these technologies, and you shouldn't lose your job if you're automating half of your work with ChatGPT successfully, let's say. Now, another example of a risk is that people use it in the wrong way. So we see that 5.5% of Stanford students last year, they reported that they were submitting ChatGPT materials with no edits whatsoever. So you're basically taking yourself out of the loop as a human. You're letting the AI do all the work. And I think this is a really big risk, especially from an education point of view. It will lead to something we call de-skilling. And de-skilling means you're reducing the amount of skills you have in certain areas that may be important for the future. So it results in employees or individuals becoming lazy, not focusing on the right thing, losing the skills that actually make us human and connect us, and then also blindly following AI, resulting in even more risk for mistakes that we saw before. And I think this one is the one thing we need to be careful of as we're starting to use AI, because people overestimate the use of it and the effectiveness of it. So all in all, with all of these pitfalls in mind, we need to keep in mind as business leaders that mass adoption is already happening. Probably there's people in your company already using this technology with the risk of going into some of these pitfalls. So it's your job as a leader to set the example and align the business with a clear strategy in place. So to summarize, these are the pitfalls: not asking the right business questions, setting the right goals, unrealistic expectations, and failing to experiment, neglecting data quality and ethics, that's something we'll dive into, and forgetting to consider the human aspect of change when it comes to skilling, or in this case, values that we need to put in place. So how can we actually tap into these learnings and actually make pitfalls into drivers? Now, one of the key things to keep in mind is that this mindset of using AI, and especially generative AI, from an individual perspective and you controlling that from a company perspective, is quite similar to how we've seen technological development being implemented in airplanes. We know that a cockpit computer is able to automate almost every part of the flight, including the takeoff, including the landing. But there's a moral aspect to it as well, where we people believe it is not right to leave some of these most difficult parts of the process up to a computer to control, because it will make us too dependent. And I think that's something we need to keep in mind when we're going into setting up a strategy as well, where we don't consider replacing people with a technology, but we consider it actually using it as part of our intelligence, as part of our work, so that we can do more with the skills we have and with the creativity we have. And we don't just take ourselves out of the loop unless it's really a mundane and boring task that demotivates us and doesn't make us exciting to thrive in today's society. So let's turn those pitfalls into process by going through some tactics. And this is where you probably want to start taking some notes, because we're going to go through a lot of reference points that you can use as a checklist and as a playbook to start implementing some more structured AI strategies based on individuals using it in your company. So important to know here that this is the starting point. You need to ask the right questions and you need to set the right goals. So that starts with identifying the areas AI can actually help you with, rather than the ones it's not good at right now, asking the right questions, and then prioritizing efforts. So here's some basic business frameworks you probably already know that you can reuse and you should just put in place before you start doing anything. So first up, identifying the areas. Here's a little overview of the use of generative AI or AI from an individual perspective in these different industries. And you can take a screenshot of this if you want, but that is displaying some of the validated use cases already. So you can look into these directions, into these departments, and see if it has any interesting business questions for you next. Going into asking the right questions, there's 3 categories you need to consider before you can start prioritizing your efforts. And I'm saying you need to ask yourself, but actually you need to provide these questions to anyone in your business that you think is using AI at this moment in time. And that can be done through broadcasting or through check-ins with your employees, but it needs to be part of the process of implementing it. So start with the business problem. What's the problem you're trying to solve? What metric are you trying to improve? By what extent? Then estimate the effort and complexity. Is it necessary to use your own resources or data? Can you do it with off-the-shelf tools? And do you need a temporary or permanent solution? Are you trying to fix something now or forever? And then lastly, what are the potential benefits? So how big is the bottleneck you're trying to solve? And how likely is it that the solution will impact the metric you're trying to focus? Now, once you ask all of these questions, you actually plot them onto these very simple priority matrix. In this case, you have curiosities at the top left, which are high in complexity and low in benefit or low in certainty of benefit. And at the bottom right, we have key business questions. So you want to make sure your ideas are towards the bottom right and the top and the bottom left. Now, I see Luke asking for practical examples of use cases with AI tools in use. So that's actually going to be part of the next process point. And keep in mind that whatever use case you use or identify, plot them onto this matrix to see how it fits your business. Going into realistic expectations and being open to experiment, we are going to learn from best practices and use cases out there. We want to make sure we use some off-the-shelf tools to experiment faster, and then make sure there's an experimentation process and mindset in place. Now let's have a look at the best practices. Now, there's already examples of how AI is used as an assistant in work, rather than just as a standalone solution or a software solution. So here's an example from Vodafone where they used an AI to increase the speed of sentiment analysis, or to even facilitate sentiment analysis, meaning that it can identify based on the customer response, whether it's negative or positive. And it can also identify what kind of emotions come to play and what the urgency of that request is. And this helps customer support agents to actually craft their messaging towards these different people in a more empathetic way, and to be aware of this before they start. So this increased customer support productivity by 20% and also increased customer satisfaction scores by 15%. And this is something you can start implementing tomorrow with the technologies that are actually available off the shelf. So where do you find these best practices? I think this is where we can provide some details later, but there's a library from AWS that basically allows you to browse by industry, business function, and even metric to find use cases that are similar to your situation. The other one that's a little bit more in depth with more evidence is the HBR case study shop. So there's more and more case studies popping up. They are still rare in the detail that is provided here, but it's something that you can acquire and you can start studying tomorrow with your team already. You can also search for your own directories in this case. So if you look for directories of use cases, you'll find that each industry is starting to collect these for themselves. So we have AI design tools collecting use cases of application of generative AI or other AI tools. And we have this library of called Journalism AI, which covers case studies in journalism for the past few years. So I think this is something you can start studying and you can start taking into consideration as you scope your initiatives as well. Going on, I think using off-the-shelf tools allows you to experiment faster and maybe de-risk different initiatives before you start building your own solutions. And I think this can be a little bit daunting. So this is a market map from base 10 with all of the generative AI tools that are available now, which maybe your employees are actually using already or should be using. And I think some of these we know, like in the marketing and sales, these have been around for a while. Copy.ai is something we've been using for the past 3 to 4 years. But now you also have text to code. Something like Replit really allows you to experiment with building applications much faster. So I think this is something worth looking into, or at least considering when you start scoping initiatives. Cool. So when you go into choosing an off-the-shelf tool, again, we have a vendor checklist. So these are questions you should ask yourself when starting to interact with any of these vendors. You shouldn't just pick one and start running it, but it is good to think about the long term and actually start going through this checklist. So there's questions you can ask yourself before choosing a vendor at the top here, and feel free to take a screenshot again so you can actually go through these questions. And then the questions for the vendor are focused on, governance, accessibility, and then applications from their side. And then especially focusing on support so that you can educate yourself and your employees as well. So use the checklist and use the market maps out there to find some off-the-shelf tools that you can start using. And then lastly, for this point, we said experimentation is key. It's really important to align investments in AI initiatives with the success rates that we see. So we know that even if you avoid the pitfalls, there's a low success rate because we're still trying to figure out how to make this technology more stable, more applicable to different use cases, and that requires experimentation. So rather than it being deterministic, it's probabilistic, and it's not certain that you will get results or keep results when you start scaling it. So here is an example of Google's machine learning experimentation process, which has an iterative approach, defining a use case, exploring the data, selecting algorithms or tools, and then going into building it and evaluating it, and then going back if it doesn't work. And if it does work, actually sharing results, planning for deployment, and then scaling it. So important here is that it's iterative, and anyone in your company trying to implement this should have that same mindset. And it's not very complicated here. It's important that experimentation is all about building, measuring, and learning. And that last part, or the last two parts, are usually missing when you start implementing this technology. So people might build, people might implement, but they might actually forget to measure what it does. And they might forget to learn from what works and what doesn't. And that doesn't allow you to really capitalize on the full potential of this technology. So make sure that loop is in place, and make sure you share frameworks with your employees to start running these experiments themselves, which can be as simple as a framework. Now, going into the third one, investing in data quality and ethics. This one, as I was talking to our own data experts, is probably going to make a huge difference in using AI, and using AI to be more competitive as well. Because if you adapt it to your own data and your own intelligence, it will really become that competitive edge. And then ethics on top of that to make sure you don't make any mistakes and you don't, you don't run into any walls. So important to keep in mind that you need to prioritize data quality. I'll give some tips there. You need to work with experts if you don't have them in-house already, so they can advise you on what data quality is. And then there's some ethics and governance you can actually start setting up today to make sure people don't make the same mistakes as the people at GitHub with Copilot or anyone else introducing a new tool. This is Cassie, Chief Decision Scientist from Google. And she says, if you really care about good results from AI, you need to invest in good data before choosing any fancy algorithm models or a parade of data scientists. And I think this is becoming more apparent as these off-the-shelf tools are available, but the data they're based on is not necessarily of high quality. So we all know the concept of shit in, shit out, or in this case, we like to shift it towards quality in, quality out. So take a more positive approach towards the data it's based on, and try to use that in your work as well. So first up, you want to make sure there's some sort of a map of the data you have available in your company. So you can start experimenting already, but if you don't know what your own intelligence is, you're going to be one step behind in making use of this technology. So what that looks like is you basically list the types of data you have, and which categories, and then to what extent you have them. And then you can evaluate where maybe AI can be applied. So I think this is a key step. If you need some help, there are some data card playbooks out there. This one is from Google that actually shows a lot of examples of how to set up labeling, how to structure your data, and how to collect the insights needed to set up a map like this. And if you can't do this yourself, as I said, you need to start working with experts. So you can keep track of some of these links, but if you can't do it yourself, it's best to start looking for an expert. So we know there's data analysts, data scientists, and data engineers. And I think for this case, data engineers are really the ones that are going to make a difference. They know how to collect data, how to set it up in a way that is useful for the analyst and scientist. So important to know where to find these people as well. And you can look within your own network, but what we really advise and where we've seen the most insightful experts pop up is also in AI communities. So if you aren't on there already, Kaggle or IBM have data science communities where people discuss the topic of data quality. And if you see anyone discussing a topic that's relevant to your business, then it doesn't hurt reaching out to them and seeing if they can work with you if you cannot hire them to begin with. So find the experts and get them involved. And then lastly, as we said, ethics and some sort of legal guidance and governance in place will also help avoid this. So we also know Stable Diffusion and Midjourney, which are the text-to-image generators. They create beautiful images. This tool allows you to create beautiful images, but it's based on other artists' work. So is this really fair? Is this really unique? And who owns the copyright of these new images? Now, if you want to set up ethics and governance in your company, you don't have to start from scratch because there's a lot of examples from more mature companies already out there. So IBM, for example, has an overview of pillars, principles, and even how to set up your own ethics board, whether that's one person or several people in your own company. And these are also the things we've seen really help to guide this new technology into the right direction. So make sure you develop guidelines or take ones that resonate with you from the existing libraries, establish a committee, and engrave the guidelines in your company values as well. If you don't want AI to be used for certain unethical measures, or if you want to focus on quality and accuracy, then this needs to be part of your way of working. It needs to be part of your way of onboarding people and getting them to do their work efficiently. So keep that in mind, and then you're going to be good. Last, but definitely not least, this is the human aspect of change. So we know that going from early adopters to scaling an AI initiative requires your employees and everyone in your teams to have certain skills, certain knowledge, and a certain mindset to allow for a good adoption rate. That starts with identifying the skills and the gaps in your organization. If you don't know where to focus, it doesn't really work to set up a shotgun approach and see where you hit something. So identify the gaps and make it specific. Build core skills. So I'm going to dive into some core skills that you can use, and then implement tactics to drive adoption across the adoption curve framework. So this is where we're going to provide some tactics related to different segments in the adoption curve. So first up, identifying the gaps. And this is where a little bit of your effort comes into play, because you have to start mapping the gaps with your HR team or with anyone else in learning and development or with your functional leaders. But you can do that by defining a vision for change, setting the business goals you set before, listing the desired behaviors or maybe attitudes, and then list the needed skills to reach those behaviors, goals, and the change. And then you need to start evaluating the current level. So if you follow these steps, you can do it on a small scale, and you can do it with experts in a workshop format. We have this capability, mapping workshop, for example, that we host, and that you can also sign up to at the end for a chance to actually run that with us for free. But you can also set this up yourself in a way that works for you. So important to follow all of these steps and to really identify where do we have the gaps in the organization. So wanted to do a quick mental check, and maybe you can drop something in the chat as well. This is not a poll, but which core skills do you think are most important to drive AI adoption and success nowadays? And yes, we will be sharing the presentation, so don't worry. So I want to see quickly, like if you start implementing AI today and you really want to scale it and you want to empower people to use it on an individual basis in the right way, what are some key skills you think are needed right now? I see confidence coming back. I think that's actually a really good one. Some soft skills, definitely important. Trust in the future, critical thinking, asking the right questions, curiosity, change management. Yeah, I see some technical skills as well, prompting and data analysis, standing behind your internal talents and know what and where AI fits in. Very nice, open-mindedness. So I see a lot of helicopter view. I see a lot of soft skills actually. So I'm really happy to see that, because if we look at the studies out there and why AI doesn't scale within organizations, there's a few sets of skills we need to focus on. Now, I'll quickly cover how your soft skill suggestions are actually linked to some of these categories. So first up is data and AI literacy. If you do not know how it works, what the potential is and what the limitations are across the board, then you're not gonna really have success in this case. And how our founder said it, running AI at scale is not like a basketball team, but more like a football team. You need to really raise the floor and make sure everybody has a baseline understanding so you can start experimenting at scale and start implementing at scale. Second, we have experimentation, and this is where a lot of soft skills come in. So you have an experimentation mindset and process. So the process covers business goals into testing, into learning, into improving. And the soft side is all about psychological safety. So making sure people actually feel okay to fail or to experiment. And this really needs to be set by leadership as well. So that experimentation category is a little bit bigger. It covers a little bit of hard skill, but a lot of soft skills like the growth mindset, curiosity, and the things that you mentioned in the chat. And lastly, we've got data engineering. Doesn't mean data analysis and data science are not important, but as we said before, data quality is what will give you a competitive edge, and making sure your organization is set up to support the application of AI. You need to have a data engineer or some sort of data engineering quality center in place to make sure your data is set up correctly and you can actually get value from it. So these are some of the key skills. And I think the last one especially is for specialism. So make sure that people, people in your company can lead the conversation there. So how do you really get everyone along? I think this is a nice framework that I've been using quite a bit for education. And I think you should use this in your company as well, because it helps you adjust your efforts to different employees. So we have these tech enthusiasts and visionaries, which are called the innovators and early adopters on the left. These can be really taken along for creating use cases, minimum viable solutions, and set the tone for everyone else. Then we have this thing called the chasm, which is the most tricky part to get past when it comes to adoption. But after that, it's all about scaling potential. So if we look at using Zoom in your company, probably before the pandemic, everybody was using Zoom on the left here. And then the pandemic forced everyone into this right-hand side where everybody started using Zoom, and it would also increase the impact that a technology has when it reaches that early majority or even into late majority in this case. So how do we address each group? Again, here, I'm going to provide several tactics. I'm not going to explain all of them, but I'll explain the general idea behind them. So if you know who your innovators are, the people that are already using this technology, then you want to put them at the forefront of setting the example. So you need to offer them access to tools, provide budget, and then also maybe host exciting events like hackathons, innovation challenges that others can join with these enthusiasts to really set up use cases in a very short amount of time. And we've seen this in Amsterdam and in Europe, where AI hackathons have actually produced really actionable and valuable products and solutions within a matter of a day. And your company can also get this in place very quickly. And then lastly, you want to make sure they get a stage. So you need to make sure things are documented and shared across the organization. Then the early adopters are a little bit harder to get along. They're just a little bit later, but they are keen to get along. So you just need to make sure they get up to speed fast through tutorials, technical documentation, and you need to make sure they get some form of personalized training and support so that you can get as many use cases and examples out of it as possible. As we said before, it's all about experimentation. Not every new initiative will work. So at this point, scale is of the essence to make sure you get enough use cases. Then going into early majority, this is where it gets tricky. This is where you have risk-averse people. People don't really want to get along, but once they do, they feel guilty. So they probably say, I should have known this earlier. But they're still the early majority. So these people you can get along with use cases to show how it impacts their work, reducing cost or increasing productivity, and then also providing more comprehensive training. So not personalized, but more comprehensive at a lower level, which we mentioned with data literacy as well. And then leverage some form of social proof through communities. So for example, in our company, we have a channel called learning/OpenAI. And this is where we also let some of the early adopters share their use cases or what they found, and then for others in the organization to see it and to really feel that things are moving. So that's something you should be looking into as well. Late majority, this is where it gets tricky. These people need even more convincing and even more risk reduction. So over here, it's more about support when things go wrong. So make sure they feel backed up and make sure they feel it's okay to make mistakes when they're trying new things, because they're really scared. And you need to really convince them with even more use cases. And then the last one, skeptics and laggards. You want to make sure they kind of stay out of the loop if you know they're there. But this is also where maybe some form of compulsory adoption is going to be useful. Similar to you showing up to your work. You can't really show up without a laptop or a computer. You can't go to work without that. And this will be the same for some of these technologies at some point. Making it compulsory is how you get people along. And then you drag them across the finish line, and you're going to have the full company on board, hopefully. So let's have a look at the tactics we discussed. First up, asking the right business question, then having realistic expectations through use cases and examples, then investing in data quality and ethics, and lastly, consider the human aspect of change. With all of these things in mind, you can start implementing some of these tactics tomorrow and start preparing for the future of AI. And although it's going to be a little bit uncertain what it exactly will do for you, these are the things that other companies have already put in place before you and have used to achieve success. So the only thing that you can do to really not prepare for the future of AI is not diving into some of these tactics and refusing to move along. So I hope you found some useful insights and useful tactics, and also looking forward to maybe diving into some questions. So let's have a look. Before we do, before I dive into the Q&A, I have a little form to share. So with our new challenges in the field of AI, we want to offer an opportunity for everyone here to apply for a free 1-hour workshop with our research, with our team, to map capability gaps in your organization and to maybe identify where to start filling the gaps and to start setting up your teams for success. Now, this workshop is run live and with the key stakeholders in your company and with some experts from our side. And you can apply through this form, and we'll use that to select someone who's the lucky one to really meet us and to run this workshop. So we'll post the link in the chat. You can actually use it there while everyone's filling this out, or while the people who think it's relevant are filling it out. I'm going to have a look at the questions real quick. So let me have a look at the Q&A. Some questions are in the chat. We're going to take about another 5 minutes to answer questions. And then after that, all the other questions we'll answer over email. So you will still be able to get some new insights or some insights adapted to your business. So let's have a look. What questions do you have? So there was one question about which generative AI tool to use for dashboarding as a web analyst. I think there are already ways to maybe use AI within your current dashboarding tool through APIs. So you can look into the APIs of OpenAPI or Google Cloud, and even use something like Zapier, which is an automation tool that can help you make use of that ChatGPT API in your other tools. But there's also tools dedicated to this, like generative BI. And maybe you want to check the landscape that I shared before by Base 10 that has a few of those dashboarding tools in there as well. Next question is AI technology open source like Android software? This is not always the case. So depending on the technology, it can be open source, can also be closed. So going on to the next one, in your experience, do you see difference in integration of AI off-the-shelf products with different main data lake platforms, S3, Google Cloud, Azure, EC? Yeah, I think definitely that's where the data quality really comes in. So where off-the-shelf tools maybe allow you to use existing databases and to really build off of that through solutions, then you have to look at accuracy, you have to look at how people use it, and you have to look at ethics and governance, as we mentioned before. While with some of the main data lake platforms where you want to integrate AI, you also have to look at the design of the data, and you have to look at the quality and the setup of the algorithms as well. So it's a lot more intensive, but as I mentioned before, adapting it to your own database will give you a competitive edge, because those are unique insights you have in the market, and also maybe adjust it to your customer base even more. So I think that's one of the key differences in those two technologies. So going on to Gus, next one. To my understanding, based on what I learned today, if I wanted to implement an AI chatbot for a healthcare website, a good idea would be to start with an off-the-shelf AI. I can go to AI use cases on AWS and search for AI chatbot and start there. Yes, you definitely can. So there might be some examples related to healthcare specifically, but I think what you could also look at maybe chatbots related to health insurance. So depending on what kind of healthcare service you offer, you might want to look for examples related to chatbots, examples related to your industry, and then maybe examples related to similar industries as well. So definitely look into those libraries and see if you can find something there. But from what I've seen, there's a lot of use cases on using chatbots. And then if you're really curious, you can also look at the ChatGPT 4 that was released yesterday, because that's especially useful for chatbot applications. So maybe that one can be interesting for you as well. So that's Gus. Going on to Pascal. Any insights on fine-tuning custom models for B2B use cases? I think we have insights on that, but that's going to be a whole other webinar. So I would invite you to maybe get in touch with us over LinkedIn, so we can pick up the conversation there, because this is a pretty extensive topic to cover. So let's pick that up as well. I'm going through the Q&A, and I see also some questions popping up in the chat. So I'm quickly going to jump over there and then see what I can do. Have you seen any specific use cases of companies adapting AI tools lately with great direct ROI? Yeah, I think good question, Jim. What I've seen has the biggest ROI at this moment is still the use of AI to increase productivity and efficiency. So although there's a lot of use cases actually implementing AI in a customer-facing way through features or maybe through complete unique solutions, I think the biggest ROI I've seen is people saving time at scale, especially in bigger companies. What we've seen with the GitHub use case, where developers save 50% of time. They're a lot faster. And if you do that across an organization, then that's insane ROI. So I think productivity is the topic that we'll look into more with these generative AI topics. Hope that answers your question. Going through, how do you think AI can be useful for digital marketing, working with Facebook, Google creatives, etc.? I think there are actually a lot of use cases in digital marketing for AI, generative AI, especially when it comes to generating content at scale. So if you want to create content for different platforms and different formats, that can already be done through some of these generative AI tools where you use text to image or maybe produce content based on certain criteria. And then on top of that, personalization becomes more and more accessible. So where you can produce content at scale, plus you can add criteria to maybe customize it to certain data points, then suddenly that becomes a really powerful tool to experiment faster, to run campaigns at a bigger scale, and to maybe set up more complex creative campaigns as well. So I think that's something to look into. There's the use case library that we showed before. AI design tools has a lot of these use cases in it, and then the AWS one as well. So look into that. I'm gonna answer, there's a lot of questions here. There's two questions I see I can go through. How would you address the key resistance about AI taking people's jobs? Yeah, I think this is a good question, because usually the people who have the least control over what they do in their job are the most afraid. So you have a lot of people in jobs that are basically executing what they've been told, and they are usually the most afraid, and also because of the messaging. So I think there's two things you can do, is by including them in the process early and showing them the potential, and then also by avoiding this idea of this fearful communication. So by saying that it will take over certain parts, or it will competition will drive us out of the market, the sentiment of the messaging that people see out there or in your company will also determine how resistant they are. Because fear will always overtake if you don't battle it with opportunity. So try to include them early and try to adjust the framing of the potential in this case. Then I'm going to take one more question out of the Q&A. So keep in mind, we're going to answer these questions afterwards and send them over. But I have time for one more. So let's see. How do you think AI can be useful? Let's see. No, so I think I'm going to take on one over here. What training are you offering for digital marketers to contain AI topics? I think question by Piotr. So we are already including AI in our digital marketing course through events. So we have our standard digital marketing course, but we offer community events where we actually teach people how to use these tools in their work. And we also use those events for like the wider audience, just like this one. But more importantly, we also offer a digital communications course that actually goes a lot deeper into how to use these AI tools to write and to produce content and include it in your strategy at scale. So that is the digital communications course. That is a subset of digital marketing going into content creation, strategy, and then also these tools and the data that you can use to assess the accuracy of it. So over there, we have interviews with someone from A21 Labs, AI21 Labs, that is, with WordTune, and some other companies to really share some insights from the industry as well. So that's what we're doing, hopefully to help people move along with this technology. So I want to thank everyone for coming by. It's been an hour full of information. So stay tuned for recordings, follow-ups, and follow up with us if you have any other questions that pop up after you've seen this webinar. Maybe something comes up, maybe you see something that's interesting, but we are keen to keep this conversation going and to see how we can get more out of this. Thanks a lot, and hope you have a really nice day, and good luck preparing for the future of AI. See you next time.